What if a giant asteroid suddenly came at us and all our defense strategies failed? Could we actually avert a disaster of biblical proportions? Or would we be helpless against the cosmic forces? These pressing questions prompted NASA to send a specially designed probe directly into the path of an asteroid. But the results were not what they expected. What unforeseen twists and turns were there? And what does this mean for our safety? DART, Double Asteroid Redirection Test. For years, engineers and scientists built a probe that knew only one goal: its certain destruction. It was clear from the beginning that NASA's DART would have a short lifespan. Launched only to test a new method of planetary defense, the spacecraft was designed to be a one-stop shop. The target of the DART spacecraft was a near-Earth object called Dimorphos. The plan was that, if successful, Dimorphos's orbit would be slightly slowed by the probe's impact and its orbit permanently altered. The trick in this type of planetary defense is not so much building the probe and slamming it into the asteroid. The trick is to accurately determine the impact intensity so that the asteroid is displaced only enough to put it on a safe orbit. But why is this so important, and why can't we just destroy asteroids? Often when people think of asteroid defense, they are haunted by the idea that these chunks of rock could simply be blown up after all. Putting an explosive charge on an asteroid or placing it inside the asteroids a la Armageddon would be theoretically possible, but this approach probably only works in the movies. The problem with this is the amount of debris that would be created after the blast. Dozens or hundreds of fragments of an asteroid would then be directed on chaotic paths and possibly become a new threat to Earth. In an extreme emergency, we humans might resort to such a measure. But research has shown that it makes much more sense to push asteroids out of collision orbit or to tow them away. Depending on the location and timing of the detection of the threat from space, a fairly small amount of effort can be enough to push an asteroid into a safe orbit. However, if the maneuver goes wrong and the asteroid is pushed too little or too far, it can remain a hazard. This is exactly why NASA tested the procedure on Dimorphos, an asteroid far enough away to not become a hazard no matter the outcome of the test. The danger from space. Dimorphos was located about 10.6 million kilometers away in 2022 and is part of a binary asteroid. The chunk, which is only 160 meters in size, orbits the asteroid Didymos, which is much larger at 780 meters. Whether Dimorphos will ever be on a collision course with Earth is not foreseeable at this time. Known asteroids behave only partly predictably. They can remain quiet for years, bound to certain orbits, and then suddenly they are magically attracted by the sun. Not everything about these processes has been researched yet. We do not know exactly which mechanisms in the solar system trigger the asteroid migrations. Currently, there are hundreds of thousands of objects, such as asteroids and comets, bound in the asteroid belt between Jupiter and Mars. Far more objects are found at the outermost edge of the solar system. In the Kuiper Belt, behind Neptune and Pluto, there are also hundreds of thousands of rocks, from the size of snowballs up to several kilometers large asteroids. And in the Oort cloud, which lies already outside of the heliosphere, there are also numerous asteroids, comets, and rocks, which can shear off and migrate towards the sun. If asteroids or comets start their flight towards the sun, they still need many years until they reach the interior of the solar system, depending on their place of origin. Normally, we should notice such a body soon. On Earth, thousands of astronomers look into the night sky. Many comets are discovered by amateur astronomers, and asteroids are constantly watched by some of the best telescopes on Earth. Still, surprises happen too. There were always smaller impacts of asteroids, which nobody foresaw, and also the object Oumuamua was noticed only when it had already passed the Earth at some 1,000 kilometers distance. Mission Planetary Defense. We have a good chance that a large asteroid or comet like the Chicxulub asteroid, which probably wiped out almost all land dinosaurs about 65 million years ago, would be sighted years before it hit. The asteroid was probably about 11 kilometers in diameter, and scientists are optimistic that a chunk of that size would catch the telescope's eye today, long before impact. For example, Oumuamua, which cheated its way past Earth, was only 1 kilometer long, flat or cigar-shaped, and also very dark, which is why no one noticed it at first. Whether Oumuamua was an asteroid or something else is still not known. About 60% of the currently known near-Earth objects are larger than 140 meters. This size is already enough to cause regional destruction on Earth. On February 15, 2013, a small asteroid fell over Russia, exploding while still in the air due to the forces of entering the Earth's atmosphere. Nevertheless, the blast shattered numerous windows, jumbled the books in the library, and injured hundreds of people. So, we have to take the threat seriously. DART reached its goal. On September 26, 2022, 10 months after its launch, the DART mission completed its task. It struck Dimorphos, initially kicking up a lot of dust and smaller pieces of rock. The asteroid was hidden behind a dense dust cloud for several days after the impact, and scientists had to wait until the asteroid's new position could be determined. We can already reveal that the asteroid was successfully redirected to another orbit. But does this also mean that DART was a success? Well, this is true, but also somehow not. NASA could proudly announce that Dimorphos was moved significantly, but the movement was almost a bit too much. The asteroid had an orbital period of 11.9 hours at the start of the experiment and is staying about 1 kilometer away from Didymos. Together, the two asteroids orbit the Sun every 2.1 Earth years. After the impact of the DART spacecraft, Dimorphos's orbital period changed by a full 32 minutes, from 11 hours and 55 minutes to 11 hours and 23 minutes. Since DART was the first mission of its kind, it was deemed a complete success, despite minor inaccuracies. Now scientists can make much more accurate calculations based on thousands of measurements. The intensity of the impact will then be better measured when the test is repeated, and we will see whether the asteroid that is next to be deflected from its orbit by humans will then end up exactly where it's supposed to be. It will certainly only be a matter of time and experience before our technologies will be able to do this. This is a reassuring feeling, and it was high time that mankind dedicated itself to this important topic. The DART mission was an international project between NASA, the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, and other partners in Italy, Japan, and the ESA. The impact in numbers and images. On September 26, 2022, Dimorphos came into view. 4 hours before impact, the spacecraft was 90,000 kilometers away. From that point on, DART was controlled fully automatically. The camera systems detected the target, and the internal navigation system took a bearing on the direct course. 90 minutes before impact, the smart nav system corrected the orbit once again, and the spacecraft arrived at its final course. When DART was 24,000 kilometers away, the asteroid also became visible to the cameras, and these images were taken. At a speed of 22,000 kilometers per hour, DART sped toward its destination. In this image, taken just 3 seconds before impact, you can see the asteroid looks like a loose pile of rubble. Still, this debris is special, dating essentially from the birth of the solar system, and little changed since. This remarkable photo is the last fully transmitted image from DART. It was taken at a distance of 12 kilometers, just 2 seconds before impact. And finally, here is the last, only partially transmitted image of DART. After that, the probe slammed into the boulder and was completely destroyed. Here is the entire sequence, sped up and played as a time-lapse. The video you see corresponds to the last 5.5 minutes of DART's final trajectory. The blur comes from DART's ion thrusters, which caused vibrations to the spacecraft and its camera. This sequence is fascinating because of the speed and drama of the situation. That a spacecraft safely hit an object as small as Dimorphos is akin to a miracle. The impact released 19 gigajoules of energy, the equivalent of nearly 5 tons of TNT. Since the encounter, a crater 150 meters wide has gaped on the surface of the asteroid, which itself is only 160 meters across. After the impact, the double asteroid system was observed by optical telescopes here on Earth. The best images came from Southern Astrophysical Research Telescope in Chile. By tracking the light curve, scientists can calculate the speed of Dimorphos's orbit. But telescopes from Earth were not the only ones observing the new features in the double asteroid system. The Italian Space Agency had contributed a very special probe to the mission. The light Italian CubeSat for imaging of asteroids probe, or LiCiCube for short, traveled into space aboard DART and separated from the parent probe 2 weeks before impact. The goal of the Italian probe was to photograph the impact as well as the system immediately after the impact. This resulted in fascinating images of a world so far from us and yet of such great importance. NASA's Hubble Space Telescope revealed debris blasted from the surface of Dimorphos on October 8, 2022. For 285 hours, the stream of dust and debris continued. $324.5 million gone. On the day of the impact, we crafted a piece of human history. For this, 5 countries of this world invested $324.5 million. With the impact, they were destroyed forever, and nevertheless, this blowing of millions was a huge success. The mission was equipped merely in comparison with other space probes. The probe was only a little bigger than a refrigerator, and with 610 kilograms, however, a very heavy refrigerator. The camera system, Draco, was kept simple. Most of the technology was in the sensors and the autonomous navigation system. A simple rocket was sufficient for the launch. SpaceX had contributed a Falcon 9 rocket for this purpose. Thus, DART was truly a symbol of cooperation between nations and companies that share the common goal of protecting Earth and us humans from asteroids from space. In October 2024, the European Space Agency will send the Hera probe into space. It will reach Didymos and Dimorphos after 10 months of travel and use cameras, a spectrometer, and an altimeter to document the size, shape, and composition of the crater left by the DART impact. Carried by 2 nanosatellites named Milani and Juventas, the Hera mission will study the internal and subsurface structures of Dimorphos and further complete our picture and knowledge of asteroids. Become a subscriber to never miss another incredible video. What did the unique photos of Venus really show? Why are they so crucial in our understanding of the second planet from the Sun? As NASA prepares its latest missions, one question remains particularly present. What secrets did the Soviet Venera probes reveal in the 1970s and 1980s? Are there clues that have eluded us until now? And what might be the consequences if NASA discovers signs of life? Venus, this enigmatic and blazingly hot celestial body, has fascinated and puzzled scientists for decades. Join us as we dive into the compelling history and future of Venus exploration. The Russian Venera program. Why the then Soviet Union, of all nations, set its sights on Venus remains a mystery to this day. Some claim that the nation invested incredible sums in Venusian exploration in order to cheat the Americans in the race to conquer space. Others claim that the Russians already possessed extensive knowledge of life on the planet at the time, but did not share that knowledge with the world. Which is true? We may never know. There is repeated speculation that both Russia and the US are withholding important space knowledge to keep people in the dark about what is really going on in the cosmos. But let's stick to the facts for now. On March 5, 1982, the Soviet Venera 14 spacecraft successfully landed on the surface of our hellish neighbor, Venus. It operated for a total of only 57 minutes before the technology gave in to the heat and toxic fumes on Venus. Still, the mission is considered one of the most successful in all of space exploration. The color panoramic images, tape recordings, and data from the descent through the atmosphere are considered unique. In essence, it was akin to a miracle that a probe remained functional on Venus for nearly an hour at all. And Venera 14 was not the only successful Venus probe. Venera was an entire series of space probes launched by the Soviet Union in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s to explore Earth's hellish neighbor. Depending on its position in its orbit, Venus is not much farther from us than Mars. While Mars is in the direction of the outer planets, Venus is inside in the direction of the Sun. Thus, it's clear that this planet could be slightly warmer than the Earth. In reality, however, it is so hellishly hot on Venus that there is no scientific, rational explanation for it. Venus is even clearly hotter than Mercury, which lies closest to the Sun. Already in the 60s, space experts and scientists thought about which planet could be visited by humans one day. The US set its sights on the Moon, and Mars was next. the Soviet Union turned to Venus, although it was already clear at that time that a human being could hardly land on this planet. While on Mars, stays for humans would be possible if they are protected by appropriate spacesuits and supplied with oxygen. Even the best protective measures would soon fail on Venus. Even building the probes was a masterpiece. Russian engineers spent nearly 3 decades building them. For years, the nation launched probe after probe toward Venus. The first ones missed their targets. Later probes crashed on landing, or their camera systems failed. Over the course of the program, 8 successfully landed on the surface, and 4 were able to take incredible photos. Some of the scientific knowledge was proudly shared with the rest of the world by the then Soviet Union. But certainly, Russian researchers did not share with the world all of their knowledge about the planet. At the time of the Venera missions, the Cold War was raging, and the East and West were hostile to each other, making the impossible possible. The reason it's so difficult to land on Venus is extreme temperatures and high pressure inside the atmosphere. Although data on the eventual climatic conditions on Venus were available as early as the 1950s, the planet was considered a great mystery. This is because Venus is constantly shrouded in a thick blanket of clouds that is impenetrable to telescopes. Seeing the surface of Mars from Earth is easy, but looking at the surface of Venus from orbit is impossible. Inside the atmosphere, temperatures are about 475 degrees Celsius. That's more than 7 times hotter than the highest air temperature ever measured on Earth, and hot enough to melt lead instantly. At the surface of Venus, the thick cloud creates a crushing air pressure more than 80 times that on Earth. The pressure resembles terrestrial oceanic pressures that exist more than 914 meters below the surface of the water. Combined with the extreme heat, this environment can easily destroy a spacesuit. However, the Venera landers were designed to withstand these intense conditions just long enough to collect data and give us our first look at the surface of Venus. To that end, Russian engineers built a sophisticated protective shell, almost certainly made of highly cooling metals and other materials similar to those used in the present for the Parker Solar Probe. Of course, the exact construction plans for the probes remain a secret of the Soviet Union, or Russia, to this day. This much is known. The Venera 9 and 12 probes had a spherical design that contained a compartment inside that could protect the electronics from atmospheric pressure and heat for as long as possible. Below the sphere was a shock-absorbing ring for landing. Above the pressure sphere was a cylindrical antenna structure and a wide, dish-shaped structure that looked like an antenna, but was actually an aero brake. The Venera 13 and 14 probes had a similar design, but were far more advanced internally. After the first landing successes, the Russian astronauts dared to install more and more sensitive and expensive technical equipment in the probes. They contained instruments to make scientific measurements of the ground and atmosphere after landing, including cameras, a microphone, a drill, and surface sampler, as well as a seismometer. They also had instruments on board to record electrical discharges during their descent phase through Venus's atmosphere. The camera was the centerpiece. A telephotometer was used to skillfully direct light to the camera, which was placed safely inside the lander. First images of Venus. Venera 9, launched on June 8, 1975, was the first mission to attempt to take photographs of the surface of Venus. Unfortunately, although the spacecraft landed successfully, only one of the lens caps on the 2 cameras separated. What was intended to be a 360-degree panoramic photo around the lander became a 180-degree photo. Nevertheless, humanity got its first glimpse of this alien, scorched landscape. Angular and partially weathered rocks dominate the landscape, many partially buried in the ground. The horizon is visible in the upper left and right corners, and somehow seems strangely auspicious, as if there is something important yet to be discovered here. The white object at the bottom of the photo is part of the lander. The distortion is caused by the old Venera imaging system. Venera 10 reached the surface on October 25, 1975. Again, unfortunately, only one of the lens caps separated properly, and a 180-degree panoramic photo was taken. According to scientists, the illumination was similar to that on Earth on a cloudy summer day during the exposure. The objects at the bottom are parts of the spacecraft, and the ground appears to be covered with flat slabs of rock, similar to volcanic areas on Earth. In December 1978, Venera 11 and 12 landed on Venus and collected over an hour of data. Initial attempts to capture color images failed. The problem with the lens caps reappeared on both missions, so the landers returned valuable data but were unable to take photographs. After this disappointing lens cap failure, engineers made a series of changes to the design of Venera 13 and 14, creating the only probes to date to ever transmit color photos of the cloaked Venusian landscape. Venera 13 landed on Venus on March 1, 1982. The lens caps were successfully ejected, and the cameras began taking a panoramic photo around the lander. The probe survived 127 minutes before the technology gave way to the harsh environment, but the time was enough to capture the landscape of Venus in color. The photo of the bizarre landscape of flat, dark, layered rocks and fine-grained soil remains the best ever taken of Venus 40 years later. Just 4 days later, on March 5, 1982, another probe, Venera 14, successfully landed in a different region of Venus. In this corner of Venus, the soil appears much more broken up, with less granular soil material. You can see the ejected lens cap in the image and the hazy horizon in the distance. Each of these incredible photos gave us a small glimpse into this world. They showed us a yellow sky over a cracked, abandoned landscape that looks both alien and familiar. Venus is harsh, so no earthly creature could ever survive there. Yet, this world may once have been Earth-like before experiencing catastrophic climate change. Is Earth facing the same fate? For a long time, NASA was not interested in exploring Venus. Toward the end of the last millennium, this was certainly due to the fact that there was hardly anything to counter the Russian findings. Just like Russia, the USA had to save money, and programs like the Venera series were unthinkable for both nations for a long time. The focus was on planets and moons where traces of life were expected, or which, like Mars, might one day be colonized. Then, US researchers found evidence for a biomarker in Venus's atmosphere. It could be that the planet harbors microorganisms. At the same time, voices were raised that the Venera missions had also found evidence for life, but the Russian researchers reportedly kept this knowledge to themselves. For NASA, the new findings are reason enough to send its own probes to Venus again. NASA's Da Vinci Plus mission will study the origin, evolution, and current state of Venus from the top of the clouds to the ground. Beginning in 2029, the Da Vinci probe is expected to visit Venus's orbit to search for signs of life and find answers to questions about whether Venus was once a habitable place. Our own world may currently be at the beginning of drastic changes. If some climate scientists' models are to be believed, the greenhouse effect and chain reactions could one day turn our now beautiful green and water-rich planet into an inhospitable hell world. If we understand more about the processes now, we may be able to develop technologies to better protect our planet. Da Vinci will also launch a descent probe carrying a camera. If the mission succeeds, the lander will become the first probe placed on the surface of Venus by NASA and the first spacecraft to land on this hot world since the Venera probes. During its hour-long descent, the probe will take thousands of measurements and provide brand new close-up images of the surface. Unfortunately, the Da Vinci Plus descent probe will not carry a panoramic camera, which means that the old photos from the Venera landers may be the best close-up images of Venus for many years to come. What did the oldest and most distant galaxies in the universe look like? What would happen if a telescope were so powerful that it could push the boundaries of what we know about the early universe? The Hubble telescope has already given us a breathtaking view of deep space, but the James Webb telescope promises to take us even further back in time. Why does this latest glimpse into the cosmos change everything scientists have previously assumed? How did it all begin? Throughout human history, thousands of scientists, philosophers, and religious people have pondered the beginning of time and the origins of creation. Many thousands of years ago, people made up stories about a god who said there would be light. Later, scientists tried to find out the truth and to check if there was a shred of truth in the old creation myths. The Big Bang Theory originated about 100 years ago and provided for the first time coherent approaches, which united all up to this time known sciences of cosmology, astronomy, and physics. The idea was a starting point in a singularity, then a bang and a boiling hot primeval soup spread within fractions of a second in a space in which, before, very probably nothing existed. For a long time, nobody doubted this theory. It seemed to be too coherent. But then the James Webb Space Telescope showed something on its first images that should not exist at all according to the theory of the Big Bang. HD1 is a galaxy estimated to be 13.5 billion light-years away. That's an unbelievable 100 million light-years further than the next galaxy, GNZ11. HD1 existed 300 million years after the assumed Big Bang. With this discovery came some fundamental new questions. How could there have already been fixed galaxies of great luminosity and order in the still so young universe? And is the discovery real at all? The shape, brightness, and stellar richness of this old galaxy is so outstanding that the discovery can never be a galaxy conforming to the laws and calculations of the Big Bang. Scientists were shocked, some were enthusiastic, and others vehemently reject the discovery until today and suspect some kind of mistake. In the photo, the oldest sources of light in the cosmos ever seen by a human being show up only as diffuse red collections of light. A layman can't see much here, but the telescope's fine measurement sensors and thousands of computer algorithms can draw so much information from this light that the human eye alone could never do. When studying thousands of galaxies in an image like this, it's common to first extract the photometry for each source with each available filter. Then, also using photometry, the redshift of each light source is determined. Observed quantities, such as apparent brightness, can be converted to physical quantities by computers once the redshift is known. The greater the distance in the space-time continuum, the higher the redshift. Astronomers can use this effect to calculate how far light has traveled to reach us, and thus the age and distance of a galaxy. This photometric redshift is easy to determine, but not quite as accurate in its results as spectroscopic redshifts, which can only be determined by a high-quality light spectrum. Spectroscopic observations always require much more observing time per galaxy. To perform a fine spectrometer analysis, a single galaxy would need to be represented in a larger image area so that the observed light is better distributed on the detector. Currently, scholars and cosmologists are still arguing whether the discovery of the oldest galaxy may be due to an error in the redshift measurement. Is the Big Bang a mistake? According to the most widely accepted cosmological models, the universe began 13.8 billion years ago with the Big Bang. From the Big Bang, the cosmic dark ages prevailed. There were loose plumes of particles and incredible heat. The young universe was, however, much too hot, as that matter could have formed. Only many 100,000 years later, the first atoms bound together and formed more stable molecules. Very slowly, the first matter was formed, then clouds of gas and dust gathered, which at some point began to oscillate so violently that the first stars were formed in the heart of the clouds, at which moment there was light in the universe. Although the Big Bang theory does not say exactly from where there were first stars, it's quite certain that these processes took several million years. Even then, there were only single giant stars with a short lifetime. Hundreds of millions of years passed before new generations of stars were formed. And then, we haven't even reached the point when stars began to form complex galaxies. But if James Webb is to be believed, there were ready-made, highly organized and starry galaxies already 300 million years after the Big Bang. Despite the assumptions, astronomers could never be sure what the early universe really looked like. So, astronomers continued to test the limits of their instruments and built a telescope like James Webb. Thanks to its highly sensitive infrared technology, this telescope, placed in space, can see further and sharper than any of its predecessors and any of the best telescopes on Earth. Webb's mission was clearly to find out what the cosmic dawn looked like. James Webb's tenure of service began in the summer of 2022 with big headlines proclaiming that astronomers would now, for the first time, look out into the vast expanse and clarify the beginnings of the cosmos. Then, the discovery of the most distant and oldest galaxy yet observed was announced. HD 1 was not originally discovered by James Webb at all. It was an image taken by Hubble, the ancient space telescope, of which Italian researchers recognized the galaxy. On April 7, 2022, it was hailed as the discovery of the most distant astronomical object ever observed. HD 1 is located at a distance of 13.5 billion light-years. Even then, the first doubts about the discovery arose. Such an old and luminous galaxy did not fit the picture. The ALMA telescope in Chile, however, confirmed the find shortly after. Nevertheless, some cosmologists did not want to believe the age of the galaxy. All the world looked toward the launch of the James Webb telescope. This was, in April, still on its journey to its location hundreds of thousands of kilometers away from the Earth in the universe. Webb was supposed to shed light on the matter and definitively rule out a mistake. Instead of doubting the age of HD 1, James Webb delivered an image showing even more galaxies than HD 1, and probably much older ones. The shock was deep, and since then, thousands of astronomers worldwide are desperately searching for answers. We see the past. Telescopes are marvelous pieces of human technology. With giant mirrors, they catch light that has traveled billions of years through space. To look into space is to look into the past, since light does not travel infinitely fast and takes time to travel through space to reach us. That's why astronomers explain that we see this distant object as it was 300 million years ago, almost immediately after the Big Bang, when our universe supposedly came into being. HD 1 and several other very old galaxy candidates have been observed by international teams of astronomers with a variety of telescopes for a total of 1,200 hours. Researchers need to be quite sure before they can set about revising old theories, or may have to admit entirely new cosmological models. To this end, the Subaru telescope, the Vista telescope, the UK infrared telescope, the Atacama large millimeter or submillimeter array, and the Spitzer space telescope were all pointed together at the same point in space. Together, the world's best telescopes should identify the true distance of the faint red object. In the same way, before HD 1, the oldest galaxy to date, GNZ 11, was confirmed. This galaxy lies in the direction of the Great Bear and held the record for the most distant galaxy for several years. GNZ 11 is 13.4 billion light-years away at a redshift of 11.09. This means it existed 400 million years after the Big Bang, but is a full 100 million years younger than HD 1. The brightness of the galaxy was also not quite as shocking as that of HD 1. The galaxy shines so brightly in ultraviolet light that it became clear that this galaxy is bursting with activity. Scientists therefore speculate HD 1 may be a starburst galaxy, where stars are being produced at a rapid pace. Before James Webb came along, it looked like these might be the very first stars in the universe. Scientists were curious, because the assumed first stars of the so-called Population 3 existed until that time only in theory, and nobody had seen them yet. They would have been huge, hot, and luminous white or bluish giant stars, which produced chemical elements heavier than hydrogen for the first time. However, this assumption could not be confirmed so far, and shortly later James Webb discovered already several other galaxies, which are probably even older than HD 1. 10 times more stars? As it appears at present, all these early galaxies were starbusters, which seethed with star formation only in such a way. Even if this means they were very old stars, or actually the Population 3 stars we were looking for, the question still remains as to why the first stars supposedly formed in complex galaxies and did not shine as loners in space. Researchers have proposed 2 new theories to explain the high energy output of ancient galaxies. One theory is that they could have a supermassive black hole at their center that is 100 million times as massive as the Sun. This would be the oldest black hole of this size yet discovered. HD 1 and other very old galaxies, on the other hand, could be home to some of the universe's first stars, which are completely different from what scientists have previously imagined. Last but not least, researchers may also have to face the unpleasant truth that previous theories about the beginning of the universe were simply wrong. The Big Bang could never be proven. Only the calculation of the circumstances was correct. In this way, already many predictions about the universe were made, which were confirmed later. However, we must not exclude that this method for the determination of the processes in the cosmos always works. So, it could be that neither HD1 nor the many other very old galaxies discovered by James Webb are the oldest. Perhaps Webb discovers soon galaxies which existed still more near at the so far assumed Big Bang, and at the latest, then researchers must rethink. Subscribe to not miss the upcoming top videos. Imagine if our solar system wasn't as lonely as we previously thought. What if there is actually evidence pointing to giant alien craft near Saturn? And what if these beings are not only far away, but closer to us than we ever thought possible? Bob Dean, a US scientist, reveals information about 12 intelligent species that may be operating among us and throughout the solar system. But who are these beings, and what are their intentions? Saturn, a planet with secrets? It seems that so far we know less about Saturn than science claims. Although several probes have already visited the gas giant, and most recently the Cassini mission studied Saturn and its moons for more than 20 years, something important seems to have escaped us. Aliens are said to be at work around Saturn. They have placed their spaceship behind the planet, there where we cannot discover it so easily from Earth. If one believes the remarks of Robert Bob Dean, then these aliens are not to be made out so easily, because they move completely or partly in another dimension. These life forms are supposed to do some kind of mining in the numerous rings of the gas planet. Apparently, the dust and rock particles that make up some of the rings are valuable and rare minerals that serve as food or fuel for this life form. Does this sound crazy to you? Well then hold on tight, because it gets even better, and Bob Dean even possessed photos to prove it all. Bob Dean's revealed monstrosities. Robert O. Dean was stationed at NATO headquarters from 1963 to 1967, having served in the US Army since 1960. He rose to the rank of Command Sergeant Major in the Korean War and later in the Vietnam War. Exactly what Dean did at NATO is unclear to this day, and the man who later caused a worldwide sensation as a ufologist was viewed critically by the organization as well as by NASA. Dean did not mince words throughout his life. From the Barcelona Exopolitics Summit on July 25, 2009, he once said in public, "There are intelligent races out there that are a billion years ahead of us. We are finding stars that probably have planets. These planets could be up to 3 times as old as our star." Dean always called NASA the "never a straight answer" organization because the US Space Agency is now known for not taking Turkey when it comes to aliens and UFOs. In spring of 2023, it came to a hearing in the American Senate, with which not NASA was under fire, but the Pentagon. This is supposed to be because the Pentagon apparently knew for a long time about extraterrestrials, but has never shared this knowledge neither with ordinary soldiers and officers, nor with normal citizens. Some fighter pilots who have seen UFOs took action against the Pentagon. They wanted to finally be able to speak without being attacked or defamed. Anyone who studies the subject must inevitably be shocked at how many spacecraft are sighted by pilots each year and the fascinating differences between them. All in all, current developments seem to confirm exactly what Bob Dean spent a lifetime trying to tell humanity. Dean shared many photos that were later misappropriated by NASA and not given the attention they deserved. This photo of a strange flying object was taken by astronauts on the Apollo 12 mission. The photograph was taken by Alan L. Bean, one of the astronauts on the mission. Alan L. Bean was the 4th man to walk on the moon. He was the lunar module pilot for the Apollo 12 mission and a talented photographer and artist. In his active days, Bean did not comment on the spacecraft sighting, and NASA downplayed the incident. Bob Dean liked to use the photo as part of his lectures, giving people amazing insights into alien contact. His work at NATO gave him extensive and surprising insights into various extraterrestrial interactions with humanity. However, no one publicly proved the man right. To this day, NATO, NASA, and the Pentagon refuse to admit that they know of the existence of extraterrestrials and possibly maintain contacts with these entities themselves. 12 species in many dimensions. In the context of a UFO presentation at the University of Leeds, Dean told very impressively that he knew of 4 different extraterrestrial groups during his service. By the time he retired, the number of known species had grown to more than 12. The expert on extraterrestrial life forms even suggested the existence of over 100 different extraterrestrial organizations. One of the 4 main groups of aliens probably resembles humans so much that these beings can mingle with humans without being detected. Dean indicated that some of these aliens would hold important positions in powerful institutions, and that the activities of this species must be viewed with caution. But how can something be controlled that hardly anyone knows about? If one believes Dean's explanations, authorities like NASA and NATO cooperate with the beings without informing completely normal citizens. This can seem frightening, but Dean also painted a positive picture of the alien life forms. Some of these species do not exist in the 3-dimensional world as we do. They live wholly or partially on other dimensions, but can interact with us, or we interact with those dimensions without us realizing it. Dean also said that alien visitation goes beyond interplanetary interactions to include interstellar and cosmic creatures that have long since left behind or been subjected to the limits of time and space. Whoever thinks now that this is mumbo-jumbo could commit a fatal mistake, because until today, most of the unsolved equations of the field theories in physics and mathematics do not open until we consider 10 or 12 dimensions possible. Already, Einstein explained that there must be more dimensions than space-time. However, during his life, he did not dare to describe these in order not to disturb conservative science and to endanger his reputation. Privately, however, Einstein was a great mystic and passionately pursued questions like these. One who dared to make the 12-dimension model public was Burkhard Heim. What happened to him was exactly what Einstein wanted to avoid. Heim was excluded by the conservative researchers and was cast into scientific sidelines by his theory, which includes a God dimension. But back to Bob Dean and his exciting photographs. Several of the photographs we are about to share with you were obtained by Dean from Dr. Norman Bergrun, a scientist and engineer for NASA Ames Research Center and Lockheed Martin. Dr. Bergrun played a key role in the Voyager missions and the probes sent out to photograph Saturn, its rings, and moons. This photograph is believed to be from NASA itself, and Dr. Bergrun was able to secure it before it was placed under censorship by the agency. It shows a large, unidentified flying object hovering just outside Saturn's rings. In a book written by Dr. Bergrun about Saturn's rings, he went on to show photographs taken by the Voyager 1 and 2 spacecraft in 1980 and 1981. There, the scientist claims that Saturn's rings are formed in part by the activity of giant electromagnetic vehicles. These vehicles are controlled by intelligent beings who presumably do some kind of mining or mineral extraction in their rings. This image finally shows the nearly 3,000-kilometer-long spaceship and space station. At the end, there seems to be something like an exhaust or some kind of energy blast. In Bergrun's and Dean's view, traces of thrusters can be seen here. Bob Dean explained that other elliptical ships, about 11,265 kilometers long, are currently orbiting Saturn inside the rings, ejecting ring material with an exhaust visible to trained eyes. Later analysis by Bergrun and others suggested that the same or similar ships orbit the Sun, Jupiter, and Uranus, collecting energies and materials there and forming the familiar rings through their activities. Dr. Bergrun concluded that these entities, which also operate on other dimensions, may even be inhabitants of Saturn and other apparently inanimate planets in the solar system. The above image is also from the Apollo 12 mission. A mysterious object was spotted by Apollo astronauts as they orbited the moon. The next picture was taken by astronaut Neil Armstrong while the astronauts were looking out the window of their small landing capsule, and this cigar-shaped object flew by. The next image shows a mysterious disc-shaped object several hundred meters in diameter. It was taken while the astronauts were on their way to the surface of the moon to take a closer look at Landsberg crater. Allegedly, the order to examine the Landsberg crater in detail came from NASA itself in order to study there possibly traces of mining activities of extraterrestrials. If you don't see a spaceship here, you better clean your eyes. How do you feel now? And has your doubt begun to dissipate? Well, take a look at these pictures. On these pictures, we see the spaceship above the crater. So NASA does have images that are not shared with the public, and only insiders can leak the information if they choose the uncomfortable path of taking action against institutions that systematically withhold the truth from us. The tragedy of NASA, the Pentagon, and the US government is always the same. Astronauts, pilots, scientists, and whistleblowers are antagonized, made to look insane, ridiculed, or excluded from scientific circles. Bob Dean and Dr. Berggren were not deterred. Dean never tired of speaking worldwide at gatherings of critical scientists and ufologists about his knowledge from 41 years of service to the United States. Incidentally, he also commented on the origin of the people themselves. Bob Dean gained knowledge that the human race is a hybrid race created by genetic modification from an extraterrestrial species some 200,000 years ago. Bob Dean died in Tucson, Arizona on October 11, 2018 at the age of 89, leaving the world a legacy we will likely ponder for a long time to come. Subscribe now, because the best videos are yet to come. The Ingenuity helicopter found an eerie spacecraft wreckage on a reconnaissance flight, then lost contact with the rover. In the meantime, Perseverance discovered a bright object that remains a mystery to this day. What were the two probes on Mars detecting? Is it space debris, or is it the first trace of an earlier civilization on Mars? The Mars helicopter Ingenuity has been on Mars since February 2021. Since then, NASA has been writing a whole new chapter of success in the exploration of the planet. Ingenuity was originally intended to be just a short test run, but in the meantime, Small Helicopter has become a valuable addition to the Perseverance rover. Join us on this exciting journey and see what else Ingenuity and Perseverance have experienced on Mars. Perseverance and Ingenuity on Mars. It's Sol 3:59, Mars time. NASA's Perseverance rover has been on Mars since 2021. Accompanying it is a small flying object, a helicopter named Ingenuity. Together, the two are somewhere in the Jezero crater to find traces of water or life on Mars. On this day, the rover once again panned its camera system, finding sand and rocks in one direction and more sand and rocks in the other. Some of the rocks are interesting, and the rover scans the area more closely. A large crack can be seen. To laymen, this seems unspectacular, but astrogeologists can draw accurate conclusions from features like this as to what forces were at work here. This allows further speculation about which geological events on Mars contributed to the formation of today's landscape. Together with the surrounding environment, it provides even more accurate pictures of how this landscape was once formed. The layering under the rock with the crack may actually indicate processes involving flowing water. As Perseverance continues to scan the rock, the Ingenuity helicopter takes off on its 20th flight. The helicopter is the rover's vanguard, so to speak, finding the most exciting spots and formations from the air. Together, the two have become a valuable team. While Ingenuity was flying, a strange sound came from Perseverance. The rover scanned itself, and lo and behold, the camera soon revealed the culprit. A rock got caught in the wheels. NASA's ground control decided to just leave the rock there. At best, it will fall out on its own. Besides the stone, this image shows the Martian soil with the fine dust, slightly larger particles, and pebbles. You can also see the dust deposits that have already formed on Perseverance. The rover had been on Mars for about 1 year when the images were taken. The dust is indeed a challenge for the technicians who designed the rovers. Finely ground, it settles almost everywhere, and it does not rain on Mars. Strong seasonal storms blow tons of dust across the surface of the red planet, and the rovers must be able to withstand these violent conditions. If a storm hits, both the rover and the helicopter can fold up all sensitive parts and go into a rest mode. To avoid being surprised by a Martian storm, NASA scientists are constantly monitoring the weather on Mars. If there are any abnormalities, the warnings are passed on to the teams, which then guide rovers such as Perseverance and even the almost identical rover Curiosity to a protected location in good time and initiate the rest mode. On the journey to the Delta Front. Perseverance and Ingenuity's next destination on this trip was the Delta Front, which is most likely the steep, sloping edges of an ancient river delta. Scientists believe that Jezero crater was a lake about 3.5 to 3.9 billion years ago, and the delta may contain evidence of microbial life. Before Perseverance left for the long drive to the delta front, he took a drill sample from a rock. Using its robotic arm, the rover points the drill exactly where Earth scientists directed. Then, off it goes, using rotation and percussive motions to penetrate the rock. After a sample is taken, it's sealed in special containers inside the rover and stored for retrieval, which is scheduled to take place at the end of the decade. Then the samples from Mars will arrive on Earth for the first time, and scientists will be able to study the rock in even greater detail. The rock that Perseverance drilled into in the images proved to be the hardest that scientists have drilled into so far. This also provides another exciting insight, because apparently the rock has widely varying hardness guards. This is very similar on Earth, but let's face it, rocks on Earth look different than on Mars, where you get the impression that everything is geologically the same. After drilling, Perseverance continues on its way. The route to the delta front leads across a plain called Celta, past the craters La Orotava and Port Angeles, and onto a plain called Three Forks. The small craters were formed after Lake Jezero dried up, most likely by impacts from meteorites and other space bodies. When Perseverance rolls through the landscape, it doesn't always have to be steered by scientists. The rover thinks and navigates on its own by processing visual impressions while rolling along leisurely at 150 meters per hour. It keeps the slow pace so that the rover has enough time to scan the surrounding rock world and crater all around and react to bumps in the subsurface. This vehicle is worth $2.2 billion, and the total mission has already cost another $700 million. One wrong step by the rover, and this valuable exploration vehicle could be lost or stuck forever. Despite the snail's pace, the delta soon became visible from a distance. A short time later, the delta revealed itself in all its glory and grandeur. As Perseverance approached the delta, excitement grew among NASA scientists. If there was life on Mars in the past, traces of fossil remains should be visible in the layers of the delta. A direct ascent was not possible for the rover, but scientists on Earth had an idea to solve the problem. Mars solar eclipse. Even before the rover turned further toward the delta, it paused. A very special event was coming up, a Martian solar eclipse. A Martian solar eclipse occurs when one of Mars's two moons, Phobos or Deimos, passes directly between Mars and the Sun. Since both moons are very small compared to the Sun, they do not completely block the Sun, but cast only a small shadow on the surface of Mars. This phenomenon is called an annular eclipse or a partial eclipse, depending on how much of the Sun is obscured. Eclipses on Mars are relatively brief and frequent due to the small size of the moons and their rapid orbits around the planet. The eclipse photographed by Perseverance that day lasted just over 40 seconds in real time. The moon Phobos can be seen. Scientists also use this event to measure subtle shifts in the moon's orbit. The information can give ideas about the composition of the celestial body. You can already see that Phobos, unlike our moon, looks more like a potato. In fact, the moon is quite irregularly shaped. As a result, some scientists believe that Phobos is a captured asteroid from the asteroid belt, while others suspect it formed from debris ejected into space by a large impact on Mars. Before Perseverance left to investigate the delta, he once again scanned the path it had traveled. As it did so, a strange part appeared that scientists could quickly identify as one of the parachutes Perseverance and Ingenuity used to land safely on Mars. At this point, the rover has traveled less than 10 kilometers in a year. Yet in that time, it has enriched humanity's knowledge of Mars in ways never before possible. The secrets of the delta. First impressions of the heavily eroded eastern edge of the delta show nothing but pebbles, sand, and debris. A cluster of rocks at the edge of the delta may have been moved there by floods in the distant past. Here, the delta already shows a strongly changed face. Rock layers like those seen in the foreground could reveal exciting details about the crater's past. However, before the scientists decide to head for a specific target, they need to get a panoramic view. Precisely because Perseverance navigates very slowly, the paths and targets must be well chosen. If the crater was once filled with water, we would be at the former bottom. Sediment deposits can show information about certain stages of development of the assumed water body, and of course, at best, traces of microorganisms. As we look around, a rock formation called Kodiak comes into view on the other side of the site. Perseverance and Ingenuity had already examined this area closely in the first year of their Mars mission. On the following pictures, you can see more impressions of the delta. In this formation called Hogwallow Flats, Perseverance suddenly makes an unexpected discovery. A brightly shining object emerges from under a rock. The fascinating find was initially given the unspectacular name, Bright Shining Object. Researchers hoped to calculate the rover's route to the delta, that it would be possible to study this feature in more detail. A few days later, the team had created a route for the delta's ascent. This area, called Hawksbill Gap, proved to be flat and gentle enough to allow Perseverance a safe ascent. At the same time, the landscape offers varied rock formations. At the time of this video's release, Perseverance is on the ascent of the delta. For now, however, let's turn our attention to the Ingenuity helicopter and its incredible find on Mars. The 27th flight was the helicopter's undoing. When Ingenuity set off on its 26th flight over the Jezero crater, the little helicopter had actually long outlived itself. The first extraterrestrial flight exploration object was only supposed to complete a few test flights and would then have already fulfilled its mission objective. However, the helicopter proved to be so robust and functional that it became Perseverance's permanent companion. During its flight that day, the helicopter discovered something that sent ground control into a frenzy. On display were the remains of a spacecraft scattered in debris on the surface of Mars. At NASA, the staff in charge held their breath. What was to be seen here? The answer was quickly found. A spacecraft? Yes. An extraterrestrial spacecraft? Unfortunately, no. What is seen here is part of a man-made spacecraft. The debris was quickly identified as the descent stage and the back shell that Perseverance and Ingenuity used to land themselves on Mars. The helicopter captured 10 color images of the crash site, which are now helping to study the flight patterns of the remains of the ship the two probes came in. Experts can glean valuable knowledge from the debris for designing more spacecraft to carry ever better probes and eventually humans to Mars. On the 27th flight, the helicopter took on an area called Fortune Ridge. At first, everything went well, and Ingenuity again snapped lots of pictures. After the flight, however, something happened that no one had hoped would happen. Ingenuity suddenly ceased radio contact. As radio silence reigned, there was a sense of oppression on the ground at NASA. Adrian Brown, the deputy program scientist at NASA, posted on the internet a letter Perseverance might have written to his little friend, the helicopter Ingenuity. "I miss you, little guy. We were once best friends, two metallic creatures of Earth sent to this red wasteland. I protected you in my mechanical womb for more than 7 months. I fear that I have seen you for the last time, and who will I share selfies with then? Who said that scientists are thoroughly rational and have no heart?" The letter worked. A few days later, contact with Ingenuity suddenly returned. Scientists suspect that the helicopter had put itself into a dormant state due to a low power condition, possibly triggered by a seasonal increase in dust and lower temperatures. Meanwhile, Ingenuity and Perseverance are still together in Jezero crater. And we say goodbye now with this selfie of the two. Let us know what you think about this unbeatable duo, the touching words of NASA scientists, and of course the exciting findings of the two probes. Neil deGrasse Tyson shared frightening news with the world. Our universe was very probably born in a black hole, and we possibly live in a black hole until today without noticing it. Does this disprove the Big Bang Theory? And why is this truth the proof for the multiverse? The answers to these questions will change your picture of the universe forever. Mysterious giants, black holes. Black holes are a fascination of science. They exist, there is no question about it, but no scientist has ever actually seen one, because black holes are invisible. They consist of a substance which escapes our eyes. It becomes perceptible only by its immense weight with which it bends space-time. By the curvature, black holes attract like magnets all matter into their proximity and suck them in. What is going on inside the black holes is a secret of science. We can only guess or calculate it with the equations of general relativity. Scientists speak of a singularity, a concentration of all matter, on only one point. Did you know that scientists have calculated that also our universe has originated from such a single point? Strange agreement. Or we live in a black hole. A quote from Neil deGrasse Tyson. It tells us that a whole new space-time can form inside a black hole in the future of the universe. Neil deGrasse Tyson, the popular astrophysicist from the USA, put it in a nutshell. Scientists have calculated that every black hole has the potential to create a new universe within itself. At first, this sounds staggering. But if we take a closer look at the nature of black holes, this assumption seems logical. We know that black holes suck up gigantic amounts of matter inside stars, planets, gas clouds, and dust disks, are decomposed into their original components, and these components are energy and information at the base. Quantum physics teaches us that information, as a basic component of matter, can never be destroyed. Let's make a jump. We look at the beginning of the universe as scientists explain it to us. There exists nothing but a potential concentrated on a single point. A tiny point, which is called singularity, contains all the information which it needs to let a complete universe come into being. We'll take another leap. Scientists imagine the end of our universe in different ways. A common and coherent theory says that at the end of the universe, gigantic black holes will have sucked in all matter and will hoard the information potential of the entire cosmos. But what then? Is it unlikely that the universe then remains in a rigid state? Much more likely is a constant movement, reshaping, and further development. If all matter is concentrated at one point in a gigantic black hole, where are we then? Exactly. We are at this one point, this singularity, from which our universe was born. Sir Roger Penrose already put forward many years ago the theory of the cyclic universe. A cosmos which is born, expands, ends, and we are born again. The newest theory of the life in a black hole goes even a bit further. The proof of the multiverse. Information is an interesting quantity in the world of quantum physics. If we look closely at the nature of information, it is not at all the case that at the end of the universe, all information must be concentrated in a single large black hole for a new universe to emerge. Theoretically, this is possible in all black holes. There is much speculation about what black holes really are. Initially, they were thought to be wormholes or portals to other dimensions. Among science fiction enthusiasts, these ideas persist to this day. Physicists do not know until today exactly what black holes really are. It's only clear that they absorb large amounts of information and do not give it away again, at least not in our universe. Here we come to the point, because somewhere this information must nevertheless go, if it is at once not destructible, and secondly, in this universe cannot escape from the black hole anymore. As with a mystic mirror, it's possible that the information which disappears here appears again in another universe. Each black hole in our universe can thus potentially be a gateway to a new, separate universe. If this is true, then we live in a multiverse, and black holes are portals to these other worlds after all. Inside and outside a black hole. Another circumstance that supports this assumption is a strange mirroring of the world, outside a black hole and inside a black hole. We don't know that much about the inside of black holes, but some values can be calculated thanks to Einstein's relativity equations. A prominent feature of all black holes is the event horizon, a boundary beyond which there is no escape for matter. What gets behind the event horizon does not return from there. Let us now explore together the world inside and outside the black hole, and you'll be amazed. Outside the event horizon of a black hole, an object clearly feels the gravitational effects of the hole. Matter is attracted to black holes, yet an object outside the black hole could still escape if it is attracted by another force or can accelerate in such a way that it resists the forces of attraction. However, once an object crosses over to the other side of the event horizon, no force or acceleration rate existing in this universe can wrestle it from the gravitational pull of the black hole. It is doomed to be absorbed into the central singularity of the black hole. Black holes gain weight from the mass they suck in. So, something must be going on inside them that we don't yet understand. Let's look at a few more interesting quantities. If we take all known forms of matter and radiation in the observable universe, we would have normal matter made of protons, neutrons, and electrons. Ghostly neutrinos, which go their very own ways and rarely interact with normal matter. Dark matter, which dominates the mass of the universe, but cannot yet be directly detected. Photons and light particles, or quanta, which carry energy from any electromagnetic event, and gravitational waves. Currently, we can see in all directions up to about 46 billion light-years away. If we now take all the energy and mass from the entire observable universe together, we arrive at an equivalent mass for the universe using Einstein's famous formula, E equals mc squared. Next, we ask an interesting question. What would happen if all of this were compressed into a single point? The answer is the same as if any mass or energy were compressed to a point. Any mass at that moment corresponds to all masses. The physical result is the same. This single point would then computationally form a black hole. As inside, so outside. Einstein's theory of gravitation describes how mass curves the space around it. The Schwarzschild radius is a term from this theory and refers to the size of a non-rotating and non-charged black hole based on its mass, or the distance between the singularity inside and the event horizon. If you were to hypothetically take the entire mass of the observable universe and turn it into a black hole, then amazingly the Schwarzschild radius of that black hole would be almost exactly as large as the observable universe itself. This is an intriguing coincidence that raises the question of whether our universe might actually be the equivalent of the interior of a black hole. If we dive even deeper into this consideration, it gets even more interesting. In the 1960s, scientists made an amazing discovery. They found that everywhere in the sky, there was some kind of faint radiation coming at us from every direction. This was like finding a soft light shining everywhere in the universe. This radiation had the same temperature in all directions of about 2,725 Kelvin, or negative 270.425 degrees Celsius, making it just above absolute zero. The way this radiation emitted light is called the black body spectrum, and its shaping clearly indicated that the newly discovered weak radiation must have originated from something that was uniformly hot, like a glowing piece of metal, and had since cooled. As the hot origin of the radiation, scientists have identified the Big Bang and the radiation itself we know as the cosmic microwave background. Both are considered crucial evidence that our universe is expanding and cooling, or that the universe was hotter and denser in the past. The further back we go, the smaller, more uniform, and more compact things were. If we go all the way back, we approach the singularity and thus the same state found in the central interior of black holes. At the singularity, matter becomes so dense and temperatures rise to ranges that the laws of our known physics break down. If we look at the equations that describe a black hole, something remarkable happens. The Schwarzschild radius, r, is the distance from the center of the black hole to its event horizon. If we start outside the event horizon and take the Schwarzschild radius of a black hole as the distance r, we arrive at a point at infinity. From this we can draw two conclusions. The distance from the event horizon to the singularity inside corresponds to infinity in the material world. Consequently, a black hole leads to infinity. Moreover, all the properties of space outside the event horizon of a black hole are intriguingly identical to the properties of space inside a black hole. If we calculate with the Schwarzschild radius r and some other quantities, we get a perfect reflection of the outside of the black hole and vice versa. The picture is comparable to taking a sphere, which is 100% reflecting, like a perfect mirror therefore. Then we notice that the totality of the universe, which is outside of the sphere, is found distorted in the mirror image, which is reflected on the surface of the sphere. These discoveries shook the foundations of cosmology. New calculations created a whole new model of the beginning of the universe based on this knowledge. Rather than having originated from a singularity, it's much more likely that the universe was set up in basic terms by a rapid state of constant exponential expansion. This matrix preceded even the hot Big Bang. If this is true, there must be some field that provided an energy that inflated a space. This field could be the space itself, and only when this has already established itself, it came to the hot Big Bang. This would make quite a few theories about expansion in space-time wrong, and we will have to wait and see what further studies and observations will show, including by the new James Webb Space Telescope. Press the subscribe button, because there are still many highlights to come.